Could I have your attention, ladies and gentlemen? Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Now we're getting to a very, very important part of the program where we'll be discussing about the what's changed conversation. I mean, a talk with development partners on ICPD and specifically on adolescents and young people and youth development. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, okay, just before we move on, I would love to let you know that this will be live streamed on YouTube. So you can use the Twitter handle at UNFPA _ ESARO, ESARO, hashtag ICPD25. Let your friends, let your colleagues know that this will be live streamed on YouTube, and the YouTube handle is UNFPA, East and Southern Africa. I mean, from what we've heard from the myriad of speakers that have been, highlighting stories of what the UNFPA has done over the years and what some of the programs on the ground which have yielded positive results. I mean, this program of action has brought the global community together and chartered a new discourse about the importance of understanding population growth, ladies and gentlemen. And we now know how to meet the sexual and reproductive health needs of literally everybody, because we've got the technological advances, we've got the technical know-how, and we've got the knowledge to empower literally everybody, despite race, despite gender, despite age, sexual orientation, or even disability status. And from what I've gathered, ladies and gentlemen, there's still a disjunction between the political process that has given birth to, to the program of action and the strategies that have been used or are geared towards resource mobilization. And I guess the big question is, are we really ready for this? Do we have the commitment to see it work? Do we have the gravitas to see it achieve its goal? And then, I mean, do we really have the political will and the commitment to see this achieve its goal? And this is why we're here today, ladies and gentlemen, to take stock of what we've done over the years, what the UNFPA has done over the years, and just advancing the reproductive rights and choices for all, and accelerating the ICDP agenda, and understanding its important contribution to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in line with Agenda 2063. Let me now call upon Ms. Justine Coulson. She has spent over 25 years working in international development in East and Southern Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and she's currently the Deputy Regional Director for UNFPA in East and Southern Africa. And prior to this, she had worked for Mary Stopes International for 10 years in East Africa and South Asia in country and regional leadership positions. She started a career in higher education sector, where she worked globally, both as a researcher and in business and innovation, in innovation development. And I'm going to call upon her to come on stage, and she'll be kick-starting the process of this conversation. Ms. Coulson, please come up. The stage is yours.
I'm connected. Now you can hear me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Simpiwe, for that introduction.
Thank you, Ms. Coulson.
And I'd actually like to introduce all of my panelists to come to the stage, and I will actually introduce you properly when you're seated, no particular order. And I'd also really like to welcome everybody who's joined us on our live stream connection online. Thank you so much for being with us here in Johannesburg today. So, we've had videos, we've had opening remarks, but this panel's really an opportunity to start digging down a little bit deeper when we think about progress on ICPD at 25. And I think particularly thinking a little bit about how different development partners have contributed to that progress. It's also an opportunity for us to reflect a little bit on what do you think is holding us back from doing more? Because we know, despite how much progress has been made, we haven't yet completely fulfilled the promise of Cairo and ICPD at 25. And then finally, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you for some real concrete actions and commitments that you feel will really accelerate the progress we make. So we have a wonderfully diverse panel today, in that we have people from private sector, from not-for-profit sector, from donor governments. But we were just reflecting, actually, that we are a women-only panel today, and we're very proud of that. A wonderful collection of successful women. So first of all, I'd like to go to, I have with us Dr. Shungu Gwarinda. She's the interim CEO and Director of Programs at the Grassa Michel Trust. Shungu's been with the Grassa Michel Trust since 2018, where she oversees the Trust's children's rights and women's economic and social advancement programs. And prior to that, she's had a very long, successful career in public administration, starting her career as a teacher in Zimbabwe, but also working on civil society and civil service capacity building in South Africa, South Sudan. And she spent 9 years championing the institutionalization of non-clinical maternal and child health support programs in East and Southern Africa. So Dr. Shungu, it's an absolute pleasure that you're here with us today. And then I'd like to move on to my panelist on my right, Ms. Jeanne Duplessis. So Jeanne is from Procter & Gamble, where she's currently the leader for corporate affairs and citizenship. She's an experienced communications professional who has worked in Africa, Asia, Europe, and the USA in private, not-for-profit, and academic sectors. Her work has included a focus on sustainability and corporate social impact and innovation. And she's currently pursuing an MPhil specializing in inclusive innovation. So I hope you're going to be bringing all of that innovation to our panel today. And at the far end, we have Miss Bianca Bota. Bianca is from Johnson & Johnson, where she's currently the leader for the strategic marketing and analytics. She's also headed up a wide marketing portfolio in sub-Saharan Africa for Johnson & Johnson. And more recently, she's been leading the Novel Dreams Tina Abantu Abasha project, which reached more than 260,000 adolescent girls and young women in only 6 months with interventions to reduce HIV transmission. And for those of you who know anything about the marketing sector in South Africa, I should say that she was also a Gold Assaja Award winner for marketing in 2016, which I know is a huge accolade in the sector. And we also have with us Miss Karina Hedemark, who is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Denmark here in South Africa. Karina has 13 years of experience with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, including postings in Uganda and South Africa. And as a diplomat, she's worked on a variety of topics and geographical areas, such as foreign and security policy in the Balkans, development cooperation, human rights, and good governance. And in her current position, she's team leader for the political team. So I'd really like you to welcome once again this hugely experienced and diverse panel. Thank you so much for being with us today. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, the way I'd like to start today is, all of your organizations have supported efforts in the region to improve the sexual and reproductive health of adolescents and girls, and that's very much why we've invited you today. But maybe starting with our two private sector colleagues, so with maybe with Jean first of all. Sure. I think just to reflect a little bit on, from a private sector perspective in the adolescent and youth space, what do you think have been the huge changes since 1994, and how has your organization contributed to that change?
So I'll start off with a bit of perspective on what we've been doing. So Procter & Gamble is a consumer goods company, and one of our brands is Always Sanitary Pads. So inspired by our commitment to gender equality and also the brand purpose to enable women and girls to be whatever they want to be, our focus in this space is really around menstrual health and menstrual hygiene. And so what we're doing as a company and as a brand is we look at it from 3 areas. So one is puberty education, and that's coming at a grade 6 age, roughly. So we run programs all around the world where we educate around 16 million girls annually on puberty and menstruation and the changes that they're experiencing in their bodies, and that includes in South Africa. In Africa, specifically South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, we complement that with access to product and donations of sanitary pads in places where it's difficult for girls to access and afford the products. And then thirdly, we look at some of the social barriers that are holding girls back and some of the taboos that still exist around menstruation. And if I reflect on what is really the difference that I've seen in this space over the last few years, is that we're actually having conversations around menstruation and puberty in very unexpected forums. Just last week, I was sitting in this room with a group of celebrities, and we were talking about periods and menstruation and girls' education. This would have been unheard of only a few years ago. So what's been really encouraging for me is how the issues have come on the agenda, and on the agenda to the extent where it is no longer just a development conversation and people in the space, but that it is a broader conversation.
Great. Maybe I could turn to Bianca to add a little bit of that as well, coming from the private sector, and how emerging issues have come to the fore, and how do you combine a private sector corporate approach with social needs?
Yes, I think first and foremost, so I represent Johnson & Johnson, but the global public health division within Johnson & Johnson. So people sometimes struggle to figure out where exactly that sits. So I'm just going to take a few seconds to position that. So as you would have GCI and you would have the commercial company, global public health sits kind of in the middle. It's taking the products, the assets, the knowledge that we have from the commercial side, and then making sure that we can provide access to that in limited resource settings. So it's really not about, about servicing communities in resource limited settings. I think the biggest shift that we have seen over the last few years is the determination, the acknowledgement, and the sheer drive towards the statistics as it relates to HIV and adolescent girls and young women that has been acknowledged and that has been embedded within the sub-Saharan Africa as well as with the global community, and we find a lot of encouragement via that. So I think our opportunity really is how do we bring innovation as innovators to the market that can help bridge that, and so that we can have sustainable impact to those people on the ground that need it the most. And an example of that is our partnership with UNFPA in South Africa. That has really been a fantastic initiative called our Dreams Tina Bantu Abasha project. And that was born really in 2016 when Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health as an enterprise partnered with Dreams PEPFAR, with Melinda Gates Foundation, with ViiV, all of the other collaborators from an enterprise point of view. But as we launched our Global Public Health office in Cape Town, we understood that we can't be living and hosting a Global Public Health office within one of the key Dreams countries and not be directly involved. So we hosted to gain insights into the life of AGYW in 9 out of the 10 Dreams countries, where we really asked them, so if we talk about how you should be empowered, what does that look like for us as an organization? I can't change the environment in which you live, but maybe I can change something within you. And girls came back to us to say there are 3 areas of intervention: leadership, employability, and sexual reproductive health resources. And that's when we partnered with UNFPA in South Africa, and we are also endorsed by She Conquers from the government side. So it's really about not working in a silo. That approach hasn't worked, it never will work. But really to see what can we bring together collectively that can really have impact. So that took us on a journey which was very much enforced in 2016 at the IS in Durban, where youth were calling out, nothing for us without us. We took that to heart, and how we've approached this program is by having each and every single aspect of this peer-to-peer program youth-led. So it's not co-creating with youth, it's actually having youth in the middle, in the center of everything relating to this program. And that meant that we've got a youth leadership team that is telling us what this program should look like, what the content should be. We've got program trainers, we've got peer educators, we've got data capturers, and even our M&E lead is all youth. So we've really taken that to heart, and we really try and embed that in the core of our program. And the result of that has been that we have never set out to be the gold standard. We're not competing with anyone. What we want to do is amplify the work that has already been done, because there has been a lot of work in the last 30 years. But why is it that we haven't seen the shift? Why is it that youth are not engaging with the plethora of information that is available? And so the approach we took, we found to be very encouraging. We launched the actual program, Dreams Tina Bantu Abasha, which means We the Youth, in June, July of 2018. And between June and December, we reached about 260,000 girls through peer-to-peer measurable impact. And that then cascaded us into our second year. So we just about 18 months of implementation. And where we take encouragement of this program is that the program is not measuring how many girls have tested for HIV. Of course, that's important. It's not measuring what is the uptake of ARVs. Yes, of course, that is important. But what we find encouraging about the program is that it's looking at what is the behavior change? What is that girl doing when she's alone at home or when she's in certain circumstances that is changing or influencing her behavior in a positive way? So we did a quick dipstick just to see what is the narrative around that, and we found that 86% of girls, as a result of this intervention, is tested for HIV. Almost 40% of girls, as a result of this intervention, is using modern contraception for the first time. And 34% are using condoms for the first time. So that then cascaded us into thinking, well, let's see what this looks from a broader point of view. And we are now busy with a massive quantitative study with 1,000 participants to see what really has been the effect on behavior change, which we believe is novel, and what we should be striving towards. So we'll have those results by November, and I'll be happy to share that with you to see how do we really shift and move that mark in a sustainable manner.
Thanks, Bianca. And I think, to really be able to show that concrete level of behaviour change is a huge achievement, because we know how challenging it can be. I think to pick up on what you said about this real youth-led design from the beginning, so maybe going to Shungu. So we know that Mama Graça Machel is a hugely inspirational women's leader in the region, but also I had an opportunity to see her speak to a group of young people last year, and she just moved and inspired the room. There was such a level of connection. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about how Mama Machel's inspiration channels through the work of the Trust, and how you invest for the good of young people in the region.
You framed that question very dangerously. In terms of trying to represent somebody like Mama Machel is a tall order.
I know, we all love her.
But I'll speak in terms of her vision, and as you said, how that influences the Trust. So, it's really around her life as a liberation fighter. In as much as the political liberation of the continent, we've moved past that phase, she still very much sees herself as a liberation fighter, and that really infuses in the work that we do as the Trust. And what we call it's the second liberation. And we stand on the shoulders of her and many other, African women who are part of the second liberation. And what the second liberation really focuses on is, while, from 25 years ago with ICPD, for example, we've made tremendous advances in terms of access, in terms of partnerships, in terms of investments on the supply side. What we see as the second liberation is really, how do we begin to invest deeper in tackling the fundamentals that even when services are available, young women, young men struggle to access that. Even when services are available, the choices, the decisions they make are really colored and peppered by the social and economic circumstances that inform their day-to-day existence. So our thrust at the Trust is really around women's economic and social advancement, that let's really, yes, make sure our systems are capable and have the resources to advance sexual reproductive health and the rights component, but how do we also change the life circumstances if it's about education as a strategy to tackle some of these issues? We know that, the longer young girls stay in school, and also when young girls finish school, the outcomes in terms of their health, their well-being, and the opportunities they're able to access to advance economically are stronger than those who drop out of school. And we are in a region where, in as much as universal access to education, again, we've made significant advances. The number of our children or young girls who complete school, we've got a gap. It's worrisome. We also know that we're in a region where a continent, 30% of young girls get married by the time they're 18. And the implications of that in terms of their reproductive health and their ability to really also advance themselves and empower themselves becomes problematic. So our approach as the Trust is really, how do we create opportunities, but also partnerships and networks powerful networks that are able to tackle the structural fundamentals that see us struggling now to, I think, run what we call the last mile to achieve Agenda 2030 and all the outcomes and aspirations also encapsulated within our AU Agenda 2063. So it's the education component, making sure girls stay in school, those who drop out. Our system is responsive and sensitive enough to identify, bring them back into school, but also provide that support to them to stay in school and then access, kind of your wraparound support around sexual reproductive health and rights. Within the women's space for young women and older women, creating sectors-based networks where women can advance each other in terms of leadership and representation, but also where they can access economic opportunities. And we've worked, for example, with entrepreneurs whose businesses focus on sexual reproductive health rights, products and services, and really looked at how we can link them into access to finance for their business, because that tends to be a problem. Can also link them to bigger companies that can provide opportunities for them to scale, to plug into their value chains as an approach to say, let's advance economically, but also build women's businesses that promote access and that can develop products and services for young women, for young girls in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I think it's great to hear you all talking about the intersections, that it's not just SRHR on its own, but it is about livelihoods, entrepreneurship, it is about leadership, it is about education, and investing in all of those to really give this holistic approach to uplifting our young people. So now I'm going to move to Karina, and thinking about where we were 25 years ago and the role of governments from the global north, but also I think how the role of those governments has maybe changed when countries such as South Africa become middle-income countries, when we've seen new partners come into the development space. Could you reflect a little bit on how far you feel we've come and maybe how Denmark's role or approach has changed over those 25 years?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's actually quite interesting to try to look back and reflect on that. I just talked to one of my colleagues the other day who had been with the ministry for a long time, and she actually led the civil society consultations in Denmark leading up to the ICPD adaptation 25 years ago. And she said there was a massive interest at that time. And the good news is really that we still feel that. As a country in Denmark, we've been lucky enough that there's a broad political consensus across the Danish parliament, but also a deep interest and consensus in the population that the rights, and I think that's what was brought to this agenda 25 years ago, that it was really centered around people's rights. So it was not about, well, we need to educate girls so they don't have that many children, and it was not about population control any longer. It was really about every girl's and every woman's and every human being's right to decide over your own body. And I think that's what it brought to us. And I think the good news is that talking about it as a basic human right to decide over your own body is just cemented. It's something that we just say without actually thinking about it today. But at that time, 25 years ago, it was not something that was common sense. So I think that's a really, really important thing that has been obtained, that rights-based approach. Then I think also partnerships. Of course, it's, representing Denmark, I'm actually quite proud to see these partnerships grow and also know that we have been a steady partner over all these years. And I think that's what it takes. It takes deep commitment to change these things because it touches everything. It's, as we also talked about, education. It's about culture. It's about health, and all things in development are actually depending on and affected by girls and women's empowerment and equality and so on. So to see, and I think that it's just taking off over the last 5-10 years, that new partners come in, private sector, civil society have been there for a long time, but I think those really, really strong partnerships is really something that is taking off, and that is extremely important. And then, of course, that we also see some results, and I think we need to, there's a long way to go, and we'll talk about that later, I think. But I was just looking at some of the results achieved, and I could see that for sub-Saharan Africa, there's a 40% decrease in maternal mortality over the last 20 years. I think that's amazing. I mean, that's thousands and thousands of girls and young women that are not dying due to pregnancy. And we really need also to look at those results and celebrate that. And then I think maybe it's a coincidence, but it's quite interesting to reflect on that a lot of good things happened 25 years ago. We had the ICPD program of action, but South Africa also became a democracy and had its first elections. And so that was a good year, but I think we also saw that it's not an easy win. You think now we have the language, and also now South Africa is a democracy, so it's a bright future. But you also realize that these things, you need to fight for them every day, and you need to, no matter what you do, when you do as a donor, when you do development cooperation, you need to think it into everything you do, and just be really aware of it. And sometimes we forget and we fail to see those aspects and how it all comes together. So it's an everyday reminder that it's really something we need to work with. And it's the same for democracy. You need to nurture it every day. I think it's like cleaning. You can clean and clean, and every time you turn your back to it, you need to clean again. And it's like that with all the important and difficult topics.
Thanks. So I completely agree. I mean, it's a long journey, yes, and we take some steps back, we move forward. But, thinking about 1994 and what the vision was at that point. So, yes, we've had a lot of progress, but we know there are still many, many girls in child marriages, many girls dying in childbirth, as you were saying, that, young people who can't access the services they need. When you look at the region, what's really holding us back? What are the big obstacles now that we're facing? And I'll open that up to anybody.
Sure. I think, just coming again from the starting point that where our entry point is into this conversation right now, which is menstrual health. I think it's really important that we start to contextualize that conversation under the broader sexual and reproductive health umbrella. And that's not happening right now, and I think that's where us as the private sector really have a role to play. Because of our huge advertising power, because of our ability to influence pop culture and influence the mainstream conversation, we really have a role to play there. And one of the things that frustrates me is now we're having the conversation about menstrual health, and then so many times the point is brought up that, yeah, but condoms are free, why should sanitary pads not be free? And I think that's such a false dichotomy, because the last time I checked, condoms were important for men and women, and not just for men. But because we're not contextualizing the broader conversation, because we're not looking at the full aspects that influence the advancements of women and girls, like Dr. Shingu mentioned, there's the socioeconomic aspects as well. So we need to have a broader contextualization of the conversations that we're having around this. And I think coming in as private sector, I think we have a role to play in sometimes presenting the ideas in a way that is understandable for the broader public. The development issues and the social issues that we are confronting are very complex, and my, hats off to the development sector and all the partners here for the work that you do to address these issues. But it's sometimes very difficult for the average person to get it and to understand how they can make a contribution. And I think where we come in with our voice as advertisers, as private sectors, as brands, we can really help to bring in the support and bring in the popular energy into addressing these issues more holistically.
Karina? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have been very surprised how difficult it has been to stay the ground. on these topics. Because when you look at what was obtained 25 years ago, there's been a lot of pushback. And when you look at also the South African Constitution and so on, you think, well, it's the biggest no-brainer that of course girls should have the right to decide over their own body. What's not to like? Why would anyone be against that? But I think that's also the key to actually understand why are the pushbacks there? And why is it that it's sensitive to talk about sexuality education, safe abortions, access to prevention, and all these things that we think we should talk about. And luckily, the South African government is not shying away from it. So you have governments that are really progressive, but you also have a lot of pushback. And even in the EU group, we discuss all the time just to keep that language, and not to expand it, but just to keep the ground on the language we could agree on 25 years ago. But I think it is about keeping, pushing that agenda and not shying away from what feels uncomfortable or controversial. And also the videos you showed, communicating it in a language that speaks to the broad audience. And then every day and every time we do something as development partners, just think it into all the things we do. I think that's what we need to do now to keep the ground, but also to hopefully advance it.
Thanks. And I think what you're saying about bringing things to the fore, I mean, this is why it's been so exciting to see the movement around investment in menstrual health and really seeing different partners come together, because for so long it's been the neglected aspect of sexual and reproductive health and girls' well-being generally. So I think we're really at a point where things are starting to happen. Shungu.
I just, when you asked that question, I thought of the little girl in Kenya. I'm sure many of us might have read about this case where a little girl, primary school child, started her menstrual cycle for a particular month while she was in class. She didn't have, her dignity pack and so forth with her, so she messed her uniform. And she was ridiculed for that and committed suicide. And so I think when you ask the question, what else is holding us back? For me, that's an example of where the real crunch of how do we go deeper to begin to really debunk issues around sexual reproductive health rights, menstrual health, so that, menstruation, for example, young girls grow up knowing it's a normal process as you transition into womanhood. So the shame, the fear, and so forth that young girls grow up with, but that I think at times society as communities, we couch around conversations and discussions around this, are the next frontier, which is not as easy to begin to address, really needs deeper investment and much more committed partnerships if we are to really accelerate and unlock to say, what is that last piece that's holding us back? Because for me, we were discussing it as the trust and saying, what was going through that young girl's mind for her to reach a point where she says, this incident that has happened to me, that happens to all women across the globe on a monthly basis, is such a problem, and I've been shamed to the extent that I have to take my own life. And so it's really around how do we even begin to have those intergenerational conversations, and role modeling that, yes, peer-to-peer amongst youth, but as, older generations, how do we also begin to interface with young girls and engage them and really, really begin to demonstrate some of these natural processes as things that are not to be feared, that are not to be shamed. So it's around those norms, the conscious and unconscious biases that inform behaviors that I think is again the next frontier that needs to be tackled.
And can I just ask you another question then? Because I mean, I was 24 in 1994, and I know that for a 24-year-old, life is very different now. And so when you think about that, how has the way that you work with young people changed over time, considering that the realities that young people live in now have also changed?
I was 16 in 1994, so I'm by no means a young person, but it's the types of conversations and the types of dynamics in terms of our relationships, you know, the top-down approach, because young people have much more access to information than, I mean, there's lots I'm still learning, you know, that I learned from young people. So they are more savvy, they are more conscious of what information is out there. And so it's really creating those platforms where that information can be engaged with in forms that are progressive, where there are aspects of that information that, you know, they have questions that are shrouded in myths, that, you know, our roles have really shifted. The conversations I had with my older sister and my mom when I was starting menstruation, and just the other week at the Trust, we had a young group of girls from Diepsloot who came to the Trust, and we were talking about menstrual health. And the type of questions they were asking are, if I think back decades when I was that age, I probably wouldn't even have known to ask those questions or dared to ask those questions because, you know, again, I might have been afraid the perception is, well, you seem to know too much. But it's really creating those platforms for, you know, positive engagement where we put them at the center of channeling how they learn, what they want to learn and how they learn, and using various methods of that learning. It's no longer just the face-to-face engagement. You know, we know there are so many social media platforms. Just this morning on Twitter, a young girl in her 20s posted something about, you know, period pain and period diarrhea. And it trended in no time because many other young women began to say, well, I experienced that actual challenge, the discomfort and what it means for me, going to work. Sometimes I actually just call in sick and so forth. And for me, what really just amazed me was, while I might be more keen to sit with my group of friends over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and engage, the platforms for engagement out there with young people, the creativity, but also understanding that the information and how they absorb information. It's the snippets, it's the key points that really they engage with. So at the Trust, we are looking at how do we also build these creative ways of bringing them in to teach us. We have now shifted our role into the learning role to say, how do they engage? What's the best way to engage with them? And how do they see our role as, you know, the best way for us to support them on their journeys to womanhood, or, you know, if it's young men as they grow into young men as well.
So let the young people lead and we will follow them with what they need. So which leads us nicely actually back to Bianca. And I have to say that I was fortunate enough to meet some of the Johnson & Johnson Global Health Leadership Fellows. So Johnson & Johnson has a program whereby they bring some of their corporate professionals from around the world, very often from developed capitals, bring them to the Cape, expose them to many of the social challenges in the Cape Flats, in Khayelitsha, and then really get them to start thinking through innovative solutions, so using all of those private sector skills, but very much for social need. But I wonder from your perspective, you know, despite the massive investment that Johnson & Johnson makes in this type of program, what do you think is really holding us back from doing more across the region to advance the agenda?
I think where I take encouragement is that a lot has been done, and that is wonderful, and we needed that for a very long time. But I think if you look at the HIV prevalence within hotspots in sub-Saharan Africa, it sits with two very diverse groups. It sits with adolescent girls and young women, age 14 to 24, and it sits with a slightly older man between the age of 25 and 35. And the sexual reproductive journey for those two groups are vastly different. And I think we've been trying to solve for it in a general way. And I'm really hoping that we will start incorporating these key cohorts and these key populations to the heart of what it is that we should be bringing to the platform to really enhance that. Because the only way for us to really protect and safeguard our mothers and our children on the continent is to work with the men in the continent. I'm not saying that in any condescending way. I'm saying that out of a point of reality and of social harm that so often goes hand in hand with gender-based violence. And I think that the same vigor and the same energy and the same focus that has been put behind AGYW program and programmatic interventions over the last 10 or 15 years should be done amongst men. And we need to understand what is it that we need to do to start enhancing and changing the mindset of men so that we can really empower women. So it's almost like a key and a lock, and we need both to really advance within the HIV space. And I'm proud to say that at the International AIDS Conference last year in Amsterdam, J&J committed to the Elton John Foundation on a Main Star project with PEPFAR. So the work that we're seeing in Dreams with PEPFAR, we are very much committed, and we've started that work already to build insights into what is driving the behavior of men. And how do you reach a man the age of 25 to 35? You know, what are those touch points? So watch the space. I think there's lots more to come. And I'm encouraged that this is once again a collaborative effort because we cannot solve for this in silos.
Excellent, thanks. And I think it's great that you mentioned boys and men. I mean, you'll have seen some of the photographs outside about the work we did with the Herd Boys in Lesotho that we know is such an important group within society. And I mean, even as we go towards the Nairobi summit, we've actually redesigned a session to be much more about the sexual and reproductive health and rights of young boys and adolescent boys and men, recognizing that they also have needs that we need to really address in all of our programming and be sensitive to. So now we get to commitments. So, I think recognizing it's very easy to talk about all of the big issues. And as Julita said this morning, we're all drops that create the ocean. And so for me, these commitments are all drops that are going to create that ocean, that's going to be that tsunami of change that will get us to 2030, that will get us through the next 25 years, having really transformed the lives of young people. And as some of you know, we have a huge global summit that's happening in Nairobi in November, which is there to both celebrate what we've achieved as partners all together across the world to really fulfill the promise of Cairo, to fulfill the program of action for ICPD, but also to gather thousands and thousands of commitments that will come at personal level, at the level of presidents, of grassroots activists, of youth collectives, of what we are all going to do over the next 10 years to really accelerate progress. So this is the point where I put you all on the spot. And maybe it's what you're going to do as an individual, because in some ways that's just as important, or what your organization is going to do. So maybe we'll just start with Bianca.
Sure. So I think there's two parts to that. One is about what commitment are we going to make, and then the other part is what destination are we working towards. So I think from a commitment point of view, I think through focus and collaboration, we as Johnson & Johnson Global Public Health will ensure sustainable and equitable access to programs, products, implementations to everyone that needs that. So whatever entities and quantities and product development that we do have, that will really make that accessible to all that need that. And I think in terms of a destination, where is it that we want to go to? We want to move to a place where we can really narrow the gap, where that gap almost becomes insignificant, and where we can really pave the way for a healthier future for all.
Thank you very much. Karina.
Yeah, as has also been mentioned, Denmark and Kenya and UNFPA are co-hosting the 25th anniversary that is taking place next month. And it's not always me as an official deciding the commitments and so on, but I think it's safe to commit that Denmark will continue to have women and girls' rights at the front and at the center in our development cooperation. And as a donor, it's also about the money, the cash. This year, we committed more than 1.5 billion rand to this particular area, sexual and reproductive health and rights, I can't commit because the Finance Act has not been approved, but from what I understand, there's a strong commitment to continue to be a really strong partner. And then from the embassy, you know, we already lined up a huge So Me campaign and so on. So we will advocate all we can for this cause.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shingu.
So at the Trust, we are a movement builder, and Mrs. Mashal herself is an SDG champion. So our commitment is really to lend our solidarity in terms of building partnerships to drive the acceleration agenda forward, but also lend our voice in amplifying what we collectively see as the critical issues and priorities that need investment, you know, that really need a bigger push going forward. So I think starting with the Nairobi summit, where Mrs. Mashal herself will be lending her voice to really amplify, celebrate the advances that have been achieved over the last 25 years, but also to amplify what really needs to be done and invested over the next 10 years to 2030.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep. So I want to tie into what Bianca had said, and that is really focusing also on boys and men when we have conversations around gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. So that's on the one side, and then the other side really, as I mentioned, opening up the space and creating the space for a braver, more comprehensive conversation around sexual and reproductive health. So with boys, and especially, you know, we've had intense few weeks in South Africa where the issue of gender-based violence has just resurfaced and really just been put on the agenda and been put on the table. And one of the things that we've been doing, and we just started this program this year, is we're supporting an organization called The Character Company, which starts with boys from the age of 6 and connects them to male mentors and role models and instills values in their lives and helps them to understand how to navigate the space as boys and eventually as young men. And I think that kind of work is so important when we look at the society that we're creating, that we start already at a young age. And maybe that girl in Kenya, I'm pretty sure that some of the people that ridiculed her were the boys in her classroom. And so when we do education and share information about puberty and menstruation, why should the boys not also understand what it's about and what's going on? So that when eventually you grow older and you have other conversations about what is your body and what is choices that you make about your body, that everybody is on the same page and can talk about it. So really integrating boys and men into these conversations and creating a space for a braver conversation about issues that affect us all.
Thanks. And so that brings us to the end of the panel. But I mean, just to thank you all for sharing the work that you're doing, the strength of your commitments and carrying us forward to Nairobi. We really appreciate it. And I wish we could stay here and chat for a bit longer because I'm starting to really enjoy the conversation. But to thank you all very, very much. Please show our appreciation for all of our panelists.
Thank you.
So for those of you who thought you were just coming to look at the pictures and have a nice lunch, I'm afraid there is work to be done. So on your table, you will find a commitment postcard. You know, and as we said, there are different levels of commitment. There's commitments on behalf of your organization, there's personal commitments, you know. So for example, I have made a personal commitment that I will bring up my boy, who is currently 9, to be fully aware of menstrual health and sexual and reproductive health and the importance of gender equality. I'm very much creating a little feminist in my house. He doesn't know it yet. So I think I'm going to hand over to Sipiwa, who's going to help us through the commitments. Yes, and we'll ask our panelists to leave. Thank you so much again. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. What a stimulating conversation. We really, really appreciate it. We really appreciate your thoughts, your views, and your insights around the issue. I mean, they touched on a wide array of issues, gender-based violence and the issue of women emancipation. It really was a stimulating conversation there. As Ms. Coulson mentioned, we'll now get to the commitment cards, and I'll ask Lindiwe, is Lindiwe here, to expedite that process. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to ask, Renata?
So as Justine just said, my name is Renata Talarico, for the ones who do not know me. I'm the regional coordinator for the Safeguard Young People program. One of the reasons why we're here today, also celebrating the ICBT 25. So as Justine said, we just don't want to hear the commitments of the organizations that were represented here today in the panel discussion, but we really want to hear your commitment, and doesn't have to be necessarily at organizational level, but can also be at individual level. We have clarified there's still a lot that needs to be done, while we have achieved already lots of work has been done, and rights are now back on the table, but there's a lot that needs to be done, and change starts from the individual as well. So please do, I'll give you about 5 minutes to write on the cards. You have 2 cards, you can choose to just write on one, to just say what are you committing to in order for the ICPD agenda to be realized by 2030 and the SDG agenda to be realized by 2030. And then we'll ask for some volunteers to just share what their personal or organizational commitments will be. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Renata. And as we wrap this program, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Ms. Coulson again to come back onto the stage to make her closing remarks. We didn't just come here to eat lunch, we came here to work, Mr. Musil.
No, Mike. Okay, so I feel we're smaller in numbers, so maybe we'll keep it a little bit more relaxed, shall we? I think that there's such a volume of amazing work that has been done under the Safeguard Young People program through our youth members in AFRIAN that we really haven't even had chance to share with you. I always feel we have so much more to share. But I'm really pleased that you've managed to see some of the stories of the young people through the photographs. You've managed to see some of the Amaze videos. Please do use them with your, your cousins, your nieces, your nephews, your children. They're made for children from the age of 9. So I really do want to take this opportunity to thank all of our partners, particularly our government partners who really continue to be our backbone in terms of funding and enabling us to deliver transformative results on the ground in our countries. I'd like to thank all of our private sector partners who have really stepped up and come to the fore in the last 5 years to be such key partners for us, and particularly bringing their innovative ideas into the work we do. I'd really like to thank our young people without whom we really don't have the projects. It doesn't mean anything without you. And it's been so exciting to hear about the stories of young people who've just graduated. We were talking today about people who've come through the Johnson & Johnson Leadership Program, who are now journalists, who are now doing, social development programming. It's a fantastic thing to see. And I also want to thank our media partners who really help us amplify our messages and take them to new audiences, so we're not just always talking to one another. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you all with us. As Julita said, it's always about creating the Africa that we want to see, that we all have a role to play in that. I very much look forward to seeing you all in Nairobi. I very much look forward to seeing you all on the road to 2030. It's just around the corner, and we know that we can really come together to transform the lives of the young people that we serve. Thank you so much.
DRT, Ms. Coulson, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of this program. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your presence, and I would really thank you for your time, for having left everything that you were doing and to come and join the United Nations in celebrating such a huge milestone, 25 years of the ICPD. It really is an absolute pleasure being in your company. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that you can be the change that you want to see. Those commitment cards that you are writing right now should be a catalyst of the change that you want to be and the change that you want to see. And we'll also request that you leave those commitment cards at the reception once we leave this room. Now, some of the panelists talked about the need for opening a broader conversation around gender-based violence. I also had a very interesting conversation with one of the founding members of the South African Male Narrative Association. You know, there's been so many nasty things being said about South African men, and there's been movements such as hashtag men are trash. You know, so it's such kinds of conversations that need to happen. It is such kinds of conversation. It's such organizations such as the South African Male Narrative that we need to embrace, that we need to give the platform and to give the voice to make sure that everybody knows that men are not trash. I mean, it takes a woman to fight gender-based violence. It takes a man to fight gender-based violence. It takes a little boy, it takes a little girl to fight gender-based violence. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute pleasure. As a matter of fact, I also read an article in the United Nations Population Fund website and saying that the rate of maternal death has actually decreased from 2000 to something much, much lower, and it's been a quite huge milestone. But then it's not a reason to celebrate. I also had a conversation with Dr. Julita and saying that we shouldn't be celebrating because the bigger goal is to achieve zero, because one death is one too many. One death is 1,000 too many. So the bigger goal is to achieve zero. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is still a work in progress. Let us hold hands. Let us reaffirm our commitments to humanitarianhood and to see the vision of the ICPD into fruition. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Simpiwe Ngone. Thank you so much for coming here. Till next time, then God bless you.